Congressman LaTourette, thank you for joining us this week. So there's been a lot of talk about the budget super committee that was set up as a result of the deal to end the government shutdown and avert defaulting on our debt. And this week we actually had movement. A deal was actually announced. Talk to us about this.
Well, Chris, it's nothing short of remarkable. We've talked in past weeks about the fact that this really wasn't going to happen. I think last week we mentioned that if it does happen, it's going to be small ball. And, you know, not to toot our own horn, but we were right. It's small ball. It's $85 billion over 2 years. But even though, you know, in the scheme of the federal budget of $3.6 trillion, it's just like a little pebble in an ocean. It's significant because it's the first time since 1986 that there will be a budget deal that actually makes it through both houses of Congress. And given the gridlock and the government shutdowns and the brinksmanship that's gone on here lately, it's not insignificant that they've reached this deal. Now, the structure of the deal is, you know, I wish I could say it was based upon political courage, but both sides get to go home and say that they stood their ground. So if you are a Democrat, you can point to the deal and say that some of the discretionary spending cuts have been restored that were as part of sequestration. You can also say that the budget number, which the Republicans had below $1 trillion in their budget resolution, is now above $1 trillion, just barely. And so they can point to those as successes. Republicans can talk about the fact that about $23 billion in defense cuts under sequestration will now be restored over the 2 years, and that this was accomplished without raising taxes. Now, both sides are being a little too cute by half, and by that I mean on the Republican side, yeah, taxes weren't raised, but the airport landing fee or security fee is going from $2.50 to $5.50. So, you know, if you fly in an airplane, it may not be a tax, but it's a fee. And that's generating a lot of money. If you're a federal employee, you're now going to kick in more to your retirement. If you're a military retiree of working age, you know, you're not quite 65, you're going to receive less of a cost of living adjustment. And so, you know, but it's a deal. And the fact that a deal has been reached between Republicans and Democrats, and that the House of Representatives has passed that deal. The Senate isn't really here to do anything, but the fact that the House has passed it with a decent margin is that's the news.
Were you surprised at the initial response from a lot of the conservative pressure groups, outside groups, who immediately, some of them actually before they actually saw the deal, said that they were against it? Were you surprised at the number of groups that came out and opposed this deal, a deal that, like you said, is small ball and it's kind of a win for everybody?
I'm surprised, not that they did it, because that's what they've been doing for the last 2 years. And I think what I'm pleasantly surprised about is Speaker Boehner's standing up and basically calling them out and saying, listen, you didn't even read the deal before you said no, and you are misleading the country. You are using our members. You are using the public to raise money for, you know, these organizations are corporations all by themselves now. They have huge staffs, they have huge offices, they have huge fancy letterhead, they go on retreats to Florida and all these other fancy places. They have become a thing. And for them to condemn a deal that was, the Republican architect was the Republicans' last vice presidential candidate, who is a conservative guy, Paul Ryan, I think the speakers had enough. And so, no, it didn't surprise me that they had that reaction. What I was surprised by is now, and what we have to watch, is the backlash that the establishment portion of the Republican Party now says, you're right, these guys are not interested in governing, and you can be a good conservative, but you can still move the government forward.
So do you think this is an opening? Do you think passing this deal, the speaker standing up to some of these groups, do you think this is an opening now for those members on both sides of the aisle, quite frankly, who actually do want to get things done, to say, you want to know what, let's forget the outside pressure groups, maybe not obsess about them all the time. Let's actually try to get at least some little things done on things like immigration or any of the other issues that we're facing.
I think this is one of those, let's run it up the flagpole and see who salutes. And so the speaker's been very forceful, not once but twice. He's called out these groups in press conferences. The message is not directed at these very, very conservative or very, very liberal people. it's directed to the 225, 30 members in the middle. And if they now believe that they can vote because the speaker has their back, so they're going to have the speaker's back, then yes, other things are going to become possible. But what those that don't like the Republican Party should not sort of jump up and down and say yay, is it doesn't mean that the Senate immigration bill is coming over lock, stock, and barrel and going to be voted on and supported by Speaker Boehner on the House floor. But it does open the door to some of the things that he's talked about, that let's do immigration piecemeal. You know, if you're willing to do that, I think he's willing to take a risk and cobble together the votes necessary to get that done. So it's I don't want to oversell the day because these things can evaporate, you know, quicker than a snowball in a microwave oven. But it's a good day, and I think if it continues on a good path, this has been a good week.
And we rarely have good days in D.C., so we'll take them when we can get them.
We rarely have snow, but we had snow this week, too.
Well, is that what they call snow? So let's turn to another subject here, the Volcker rule. We're finally going to have regulations regarding the implementation of the Volcker rule. Talk to us about this.
Well, for those that don't follow financial matters on a regular basis, just a quick primer. In the Dodd-Frank legislation that was meant to address some of the difficulties that led to the crash in 2008, was the reinstatement of something known as the Volcker Rule, which is, broad brush terms, is that banks are not permitted to engage in investing their funds for profit-making, sort of speculative activity. There is a feeling that you know, led to part of the problem we had in 2008 with the housing collapse and everything else. But it's been 3 years since Dodd-Frank, and so finally the regulators have gotten around to writing the actual language of what they think the Volcker rule should be. To be honest with you, we're still digesting it here at McDonald Hopkins Government Strategies, and we'll send our clients something based upon what we think its impacts are. But the early reads are that if you're in the financial services industry, it's not going to be so good. And as a matter of fact, the Chamber, on the day that the rule came out, indicated that this was going to be bad for business. And so some of the things that I'm going to be looking for are, in the initial draft, they were going to limit banks from participating in government bonds, municipal bonds, which, you know, I mean, if you can't have municipal bonds financed, a lot of stuff isn't going to get done, and there's no financing for these cities and towns and everything else. So we're going to look at that. We're also going to look at the impact on small, medium-sized institutions. Again, you know, even though the language of Dodd-Frank says it's only institutions of $10 billion or more, everybody understands that it's going to be everybody. So we'll look at the pain that it causes to community banks, to credit unions, and to others. My sense is that they've probably taken a sledgehammer to kill an ant, but I'm going to withhold judgment until we've looked at it, and we'll get out to our clients as soon as we can.
One quick follow-up on that. What do you think this says about the regulatory process in general? I mean, this has taken 3 years to actually have the implementing rules out. 3 different regulatory agencies involved. I mean, you know, it seemed like at times you could just have the Benny Hill music in the background for how this process worked. I mean, does this speak to the need for us to have a more streamlined regulatory process in this country?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you know, it's really the regulations that are the devil in the details. You know, if you look at a bill, I mean, that your elected representative votes on, maybe it's 100, 200 pages. It doesn't lay out all the jots and tittles and all the T's and the I's and everything else. It's when the regulators get it in their hands, and the fact that it takes 3 years to come up with something, and then sometimes that's a short period of time. I mean, some regulations take years and years and years. It just adds to the uncertainty, the confusion, and that's why some companies, I mean, there's a company that's a client of the firm in Menor Steris. They now spend more money on their payroll for people to comply with regulations than they do to manufacture their product.
There's a heartwarming,
Merry
feel
Christmas.
good, hi, exactly,
Merry
Merry
Christmas.
Christmas. Thank you, Congressman Lotz. Right, we'll try to think of something happier to talk about next week.